Welcome to Wellness and Wisdom with me, Dr. Nadu Tuakli. Here you can expect to hear conversations about everything women over 40 care about. From optimal wellness and peak performance, from intimacy to travel and finances and more. I will be speaking to interesting women and sometimes men to educate and motivate you to live your best life. If you want to find out more, please head over to my website, drtwakli.com, or subscribe to my blog. You can also read my book, Sex, Sanity, and Sleep. We are in this together. Hello. Welcome to my podcast. Today I'm podcasting from sunny Spain. Why Spain, you might ask? Well, I was born in the United Kingdom. I lived in Africa for many years. I live in the United States, and my husband and I love to visit Spain several times a year. So I like to think of myself as a global citizen. As a doctor for over 30 years, with an emphasis on women's health and longevity, I'm also interested in global health. I'm passionate about women's empowerment and how women affect society as a whole. As a Harvard alumna, I come across many interesting people, and one that I'm chatting with today went to a new one-year program at my alma mater, which is designed for people who have achieved a lot in their careers, but want to still continue making an impact. My guest today is Avivah Wittenberg Cox, who is a consultant, coach, writer, speaker, specializing in generational and gender balance, and the longevity economy, and the impact of 60-year careers. Another global citizen, she has lived and studied in Toronto, Paris, and last year in Boston. She now lives in London. She considers herself to be in her third quarter and has a podcast called 4 Quarter Lives. She's a prolific author, having written several books, including How Women Mean Business, 7 Steps to Leading Gender-Balanced Businesses, Late Love, Mating and Maturity, and most recently, Thriving to 100 through Life's 4 Quarters. Avivah spent a year researching and writing about the opportunity that comes from longevity and navigating longer lives at work and at home. Today, we're going to discuss several topics that are of interest to mature women, such as relationships, self-empowerment, reinvention, and how to pivot when change is necessary. I'm happy to welcome Avivah Wittenberg Cox to my podcast. Hello, Avivah. Welcome.
Thank you, Nadu. Lovely to be with you.
Much appreciated. So, you are a prolific writer with a podcast, a blog, and books, and it's clear that you're a woman who has a lot to say. And you have built...
You can't shut me up. That's the problem.
And you have built an audience of people who want to hear what you have to say. So no, we don't want to shut you up.
That's the tricky part.
So one thing you've written a lot about is gender balancing. Having given several talks at different forums, including TED Talks, it seems to be one of the major focuses of your work. What is the definition of gender balancing? And can you tell my listeners about gender balancing and why it is so important to the larger community?
I'll start with the end. Why is gender balance important? I think gender balance is an absolutely essential building block of almost everything: health, wealth, sustainability, climate change, and the future of our planet and our species. So that's a pretty simple answer, right? Either we get this right, or we continue to be ruled by the kind of environment that we see all around us that isn't always as optimal as it could be. I think it was better gender balance. So we have spent time and money educating the other 50% of the population. It's time that we leverage the investment that we've made and let women thrive and contribute their best selves to the good of all. That would be my reasons for gender balance. And I have spent 20 years, pretty well the best 20 years of my life, on doing this work in mostly the business world and the corporate world. And the frame I took on this and the way I introduced it into organizations was very much through a leadership lens. I think whether you gender balance or not is a leadership issue and not much else. I don't believe in the frame that it's a woman's issue, that women should stop or change or do or become something new or different. Viscerally disagree with the book Lean In and all of its ilk of how women should look or sound or speak up. Women are doing just fine. They have become the majority of the educated population in almost every country of the globe. They're outperforming boys at almost every grade level in almost every country and in almost every subject. And I find the idea that it's women who still need to do something in order to succeed laughable. The issue is that organizations, leaders, and systems have to now adapt to a much more gender balanced century, and their ability to do so will define their success in the future.
Now, let's assume that workplaces are more gender balanced. How do you think that will change the actual culture of the environment? Or is it more of the same?
It very clearly changes organizations that are actually gender balanced, but gender balanced like all the way through into power, not just 20% of men at the top running 80% of women at the bottom, right? We've seen that kind of gender balance. That does not change the culture. But if you truly have a gender balance, which I define, you asked me what my definition of gender balance, my personal definition is a maximum of 60% of any gender, anywhere, at any level. And if you can build that and sustain it, I think the outcome is a much more balanced kind of culture that integrates the kind of differences that many organizations really need, that reflect the reality of the world and its talent and its customers and its stakeholders increasingly. So I think if you're not yet gender balanced, and very few companies today still are, right? We're seeing the successful first mover, sophisticated firms who have done this best. There's still a long kind of 90% tail of companies that are still moving along. You get better returns all across the board. Better results, better returns, happier people, and healthier employees. It's kind of proven. Like, you don't really need to argue the proof anymore. It's how do we get it done and spread more broadly.
And how about gender balancing in a social context outside of the professional realm? Gender balance at home.
I think it's a great point. I think you're absolutely right. I think we spent a lot of the last few years focusing on gender balance at work, and we have neglected a little bit the issue of gender balance at home, which is resurfacing in lots of interesting ways. I think we saw it a lot during the pandemic, just how unequal some homes can remain, how difficult it can be to really engage both partners in both the personal and the professional. And I still think there's some work to be done on that area. And even very powerful women at work are often not getting necessarily the balance they want at home.
So another topic that you talked about in your TED Talks was conscious coupling. And I guess the gender balance at home kind of leads us into that. And I must say that the conscious coupling kind of resonated with me. For those who don't know what we're talking about the two career families. I think it was a fascinating concept, and I think it will resonate with our listeners too. Could you talk a little bit about that idea?
The world has changed. Women have changed beyond all recognition over the last 60 years, basically since the invention of the pill, their education, and their massive arrival into work of all kinds. And that move has completely changed and the workplace and the home. So today, 85% of young couples are dual income. Not all dual career, but dual income. It's very hard to survive on a single income in today's economy. And that compares to about 45% 30 years ago. So the home is now the reality of two people working usually full time. It's very much an exception up at the, kind of most privileged, richest part of the population to now get a single earner home. Then it's a question of, have both partners adapted to this reality? There are all kinds of pressures from society, pressures from peers, pressures from parents, and the way they led their lives. A lot of young men are changing beyond all measure, right? The young men of today, the millennials and Gen Zs, are not the same as the boomer generation and the Gen Xers. They are much more interested in hands-on fatherhood, much more balanced in the way they lead their couples. And I think that's hugely promising, but not always finished work. And so I always suggest that we spend a lot of time talking about leadership at work. What are the leadership skills? How do you hone them? How do you perfect them? And I always think, wouldn't it be nice if we could bring our leadership skills home and set up these two-income couples, which are super complicated to run and manage, especially if you throw in a few kids into the mix. And the kind of leadership I'm talking about is to have a vision for the couple, to know where your values are, what your mission is as a couple, as a family, what your future goals are together and individually, to negotiate those, to communicate them clearly to those around you, to have budgets and scenario planning and forecasting and even performance appraisals. I'm a big believer in let's have regular performance appraisals, one spouse of the other. Why do we do this at work with our teams and think it's completely normal, and then do absolutely nothing of the kind at home and think that too is normal? I think we're going to have to, if we want to consciously couple, the idea is also that we have to build better relational skills. We have to get really good at understanding and working as a team. It's your most important team in life is your home team. And I think generally a lot of us underinvest in our teams.
So we need more planning. Now, one of the books that you wrote was Mating in Maturity, just getting a little bit more personal now. Can you tell me something about that book and what made you write it in the first place and what your major points were?
I just had turned 50 and decided that one of the changes I was going to make, a lot of people at 50 make big decisions and change their goals. I decided to leave a very long marriage and find a new relationship that would be more aligned with my own personal goals, vision, and style. And I did. I very happily pounced on a very eligible British bachelor and really changed the complete context of my personal life in a way that created a lot of joy and happiness in life quite late, right? And
Conscious
I think
coupling.
that was a very conscious coupling move. As I went through this, I started, as I tend to do, to read a lot about the second half of life and longevity and late life issues as I was making these choices and moves, and found that a lot of people were divorcing and separating like me rather late in life. In their 50s and 60s is where the divorce rate is increasing. Almost everywhere else, it's decreased quite substantively over the last 30 years. People usually misinterpret that data. But where it has increased is in this midlife zone. And so I interviewed a lot of people who had recoupled after 50 to explore, why, what happened, what was the story. And that was the origin of that book, to compare my own experience with others and try and pull out some lessons about what is a pretty turbulent transition and how to do it better, how to leave well, love kindly, and ensure that you don't wound the next generation.
So I guess a lot of the divorces that you're referring to happen post empty nest. Do you think the kids leaving home have any effect on that? Or do you think it's just that women have more time to focus on themselves and their needs and figure out what their priorities are?
I think you're absolutely right that the emptiness phenomenon is huge, as is the longevity phenomenon, right? When you know that you're going to live longer and longer, let's say 90 to 100, and you know that you're turning 50 and you have another 50 years to spend with the person on the other side of the kitchen table, and you've been there already for 20 or 30, there is a moment where you're going to think, do I want to stay? And if I don't want to stay, what's the right time to go? And very commonly, people wait. They wait until the children go. If the couple isn't too problematic, they tend to wait and play it out and until the kids leave, which is not always the best choice, I've heard in the research since then, but that's what most people do.
Now we say we are halfway. You're halfway. And you wrote a book about life's 4 quarters and thriving to 100. Can you explain what the concept of the 4 quarters is?
So I'm now a little beyond halfway, since I am now 61 as we talk, which puts me not quite
Barely halfway.
barely halfway. I'm sort of halfway the third quarter. So my idea of quarters is half the children born today are going to live to be 100. Longevity and adult development are kind of complicated fields with complicated words and phases. So I was just looking for a simplification of how do we create a new roadmap for these longer lives? And I came up with this idea of 4 quarters. Since I work in the business world quite a bit, they're always talking about Q1 and Q2 and how is your performance in Q3 and what's the return in Q4. And so I thought, well, we could do the same thing for a life. How do we measure a life? And if we measure it in quarters, I thought it resonated quite a bit that Q1 is where we learn and grow most typically. Q2 is the first phase of adulthood where we tend to achieve and do the things that are expected of us by our families, our cultures, our countries. We tend to found families, companies, couples. We tend to build our egos. And I'd say that Q3, those 25 years after 50, are kind of the new piece in the pudding. We're used to old age, we're used to adulthood, but Q3, these 25 years, are, I think, the really new thing gifted to us by this dramatically increased longevity. We have basically an extra quarter century given to us by better health and science. And then the question is, what are we going to do with it? The answer is, how do we approach Q3? How do we milk it, prepare for it, and understand it? And I think that's the big opportunity, especially for women who may have found that Q2 was a time of extreme juggling, impossible reconciliations between work and family and care roles. And yeah, I think in Q3, that begins to shed in importance. The kids do eventually move on, if you're lucky. The parents do eventually move on, and then you find yourself in a very different phase of life with a lot more time and all the experience, knowledge, and networks built up over decades. And it can become a very fruitful time.
Now, what advice would you give to women who want to actually pivot in their late 50s, and still have an impactful life, make an impact, give back, do something of significance?
Well, I think anybody can do something, give back, give forward, whatever vocabulary you use at any age and stage. I think no matter what age you are, there is an issue of, it's true, of ageism in the zeitgeist, in the workplace and all these things. And so I think it helps. I don't think you actually need to pivot. It's a word I'm starting to question, because what you're really doing is building on decades of experience and work experience and networks, right? So you don't necessarily have to turn anywhere very dramatically, but you have to keep building and nourishing and find where in all that you have done, is there some kind of thread of continuity with where you would like to go next and what you would like to impact. And half the skill of the transition at this age and stage is to identify that kind of breadcrumb trail. What are you going to pull from your past, build on from your present to create and move towards your future? That's the task of midlife.
So is that why you went back to school? I know you were tracking your path through your 60s, and you have a blog called Elderberries, which you say is all about longevity. Tell me about going back to school.
Yeah, I went back to school at the age of 60. It was kind of my 60th birthday gift to myself. And it was a very distinct decision that, wow, a few years ago, I thought I'm going to slow down. I'm heading towards 60. And then I started researching and writing about longevity. And I thought, my God, I might have 30 or 40 years ahead of me. I can't possibly be thinking of slowing down. But it's all around, right? Everybody talks about slowing down, retirement, what are they going to do? And it affects you, right? And I suddenly thought, my goodness, I have to get out of this mentality. Went off to Harvard for a year and did the special program for people of our age and stage who would like to give forward and have significant social impact in their latter years. And so that's what I did. And it's now, I think, absolutely essential if you want to continue, as you were saying, Nadu, if you want to keep impacting and being relevant and giving forward, that you really decide that as early as you can and lean into it. Think about it, prepare for it, identify what it is you might want to do and where you might want to contribute. And then you kind of have to work fairly hard at it, because most of the world is going to try and push you aside and say, you know what, you're kind of past it. And the only way through is to prove that, oh my gosh, no, you're still very much not done yet.
So, as a physician, I have to be a party pooper and say that these bonus decades and extra potential time that we have, of course, is only available to those who actually take care of themselves. So, the health is a critical aspect of all these plans for longevity. I actually practice longevity medicine, in case you were not aware of that. I agree with you. The potential for being a centenarian is there. I mean, everyone can get to 100 or beyond if they start early enough to take care of themselves. Obviously, there are some people that reaching 80 may be a little bit of a challenge. But yes, we can get bonus decades out of it if we do everything possible to maintain our health. And obviously, technology, the change in biotechnology has really helped us with that.
The challenge of longevity is a little bit more complicated than just health, although that we can see the statistics, right? People are getting much, much older and much healthier longer. But it's not just health. It's wealth, it's knowledge, it's purpose. It's a lot of different
Mental
things,
health.
each of which has to be invested in. You can't, even if you're super healthy, you might be sitting bored to tears in your backyard if you don't have something to work on and with.
Yes, I agree 100%. But I also think that there are people that think maybe genetically they're destined to die in their 50s or 60s because that's what happened to their grandfather, without understanding that, you may have the genes, but how you manage them determines whether they actually manifest or not. So everyone has the potential to live a lot longer than their forefathers or just their parents. They have to apply, just as you were suggesting, one has to plan forward. You have to make plans for lots of things. So, what's next for you? You're just over halfway. Do you have any plans at any point to retire?
Not really, not in the format. I mean, I never think like I work either. So
Oh, you work, Aviva.
I don't think of it as work. I mean, I'm very interested in a certain number of projects and themes. I'm very privileged in being able to often get paid for exploring them, sharing them, and communicating them and writing about them. And so those are my plans going forward, is really to, what my short form of what I'd like to do is unleash the older billion that we currently have on the planet, and the second billion that we are all going to turn into, you and I, have a lot to give and have to be ready and raring to go. And that's a little bit what I'll plan to be doing with my next decade, is how do we help and support that kind of wake up of an entire generation, know better how to manage the health, wealth, and wellness issues that you are describing very accurately.
Yeah, I can tell you're an energizer bunny. You just keep going. So it's amazing what you're able to achieve, and you're a prolific writer.
The knowledge workers of our era, the people who work with their brains and their writing and their words, that are the things that don't diminish that much with age. I can be in a wheelchair. I can be pretty wrecked up physically, and I can still do what I love, because actually I really love not moving. I will have no trouble being confined to my little hospice room somewhere, because I'll still be doing what I love, which is reading and writing and
And
podcasts and
thinking.
thinking. That's all I care about. And that, I can tell you, there is an unlimited supply, even if I were to live much beyond 100.
So would you suggest that all women go back to school in their 50s and 60s?
No, I sometimes think women get overtrained. That's the first reaction is go back to school. And I think sometimes they don't need to go back to school. They have the knowledge they need. All they need is the activation and the networks to get it going. But so I think school is certainly one nice option. I think going forward, we're going to really have to reinvest in our brains and our capacities every decade. I mean, or every even 7 years, like the old sabbatical system in universities. We're all going to need that kind of sabbatical injection in ourselves. Where we get it, how long it takes. Those are some of the issues I'm researching and thinking about because I'm not convinced that today's educational system is geared up to do that at all. And that's going to have to change really quickly.
So what's next for Avivah? Another book?
Yeah, I've got a couple of books up the pipeline. I've got this
Oh,
podcast that I'm doing, my weekly Elderberries blog that I find very entertaining. That's a very personal voice, which is new to me. I don't usually write that way, and it's very liberating to be able to share more blending of the personal professional compartmentalization that we've all become quite used to. And I'm going to do a lot more teaching. I've started with a program called the Midlife Rethink, where I invite people to come and do a very short injection, deep dive into how they might want to think about reinventions for Q3. Adjunct
like a
professor,
think tank.
a little bit of a think tanky kind of session, just 3 Mondays nights in a row. And I'll be doing more teaching, more online teaching, more passing on through an adjunct professorship I have at DePaul University in Chicago.
So if people are interested in reading more about you or following your blog, how would they do that?
So the easiest centralization of everything I do is just my own website, which is avivahwittenbergcox.com. No hyphens, no nothing. And my Substack, which is this weekly blog, is Elderberries. So elderberries.substack.com, and it's free. You're very welcome to sign up. There's a free version of it. And my podcast is also easy to find on any platform. It's four-quarterlives.com, fourquarterlives.com. And there I tend to interview all kinds of people turning around longevity, gender differences in aging, pension issues, financial issues, social issues, couple issues. We're going to explore pretty well every piece of this puzzle over the next few years. And I will do that as internationally as I possibly can because I find a lot of what's written about in the space comes from Anglo-Saxons. And I think we're not actually the people who age best in the world. So I'd like to spread my study a little bit more globally and learn from some of the countries and cultures that do it better.
So Leslie, let me ask you a little bit about your family. You are a family person. You're a mother.
I was a daughter until last year, but I lost my mom 97 last September. She was an amazing woman. And her legacy stays very strong in my head and heart. And I have 2 kids. I have 2 husbands. I have an ex-husband and a current husband. I work in twos. So my current husband is a delightful, as I said, British man. We live in London. And my 2 kids, who are globetrotters like their mother, I have a son who lives in Dakar with his Senegalese wife and my pretty new little half Senegalese granddaughter, Zoe. And I have a daughter in New York who's living it up in the Big Apple.
Oh, good for her. And being a grandmother, nothing beats that. Nothing beats that. It's like you get that grandchild, it's like, wow, this is what they keep talking about being a grand. Agree.
Absolutely. The
So what?
cherry on the cake of
Oh
life.
yeah, yeah. So what does your granddaughter call you?
Glamma.
Grandma. I I never realized until I became a grandmother how many different terms there are for grandmas. And my daughter said, "What do you want to be called?" And you better hurry up because she has, different grandmas, and better hurry up because all the names are going to be gone soon. So you can be Alma, you can be Nana, you can be Ambuya, you can be Granny, you can. So I was like, wow, I never realized there was so much. So I'm Nana.
Nana's very nice. I did a lot of research on this because, as you say, there are lots and lots of names, but I found a lot of them kind of aging and not so hip. But I thought Glamma was pretty good.
Yeah,
So we're
Glamma.
Glamma and Glampa.
Ah, nice.
I try and
Well,
live up to it.
yes, yes, and you do very well. So it was wonderful having you on the podcast today, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, it was nice meeting you online also, and I wish you all the best in your third and fourth and maybe fifth quarters.
Thank you. We'll see. We'll keep talking as we go through.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
So today we talked about conscious coupling, mature mating, gender balancing, self-empowerment, and reinvention. Also, the notion of potential bonus decades. If you're over 50 and thinking of slowing down, you don't have to unless you want to. People around you may discourage you from trying new things or taking on new tasks, but it's all up to you and what your heart tells you to do. Each of us in our own way can continue to make an impact on our families, communities, and in fact, the world. And taking care of our health, mind, and body, we should make it to at least 100. If you don't know how, consider joining my anti-aging program. Most women already have the skills and knowledge they need, so not everyone has to go back to school. But if you are aware of any gaps you want to fill, you can always take a few courses. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and will share it with your friends and family. Click the follow button or subscribe so you'll be informed whenever a new podcast is released. Until next time, I wish you the best of health and happiness. Continue to seek wellness and wisdom. Bye for now.